This video is made up of two parts. The first part is about theism. The second part is about Umineko. I guess you could say both parts tackle some metaphysics, and another thing you could say is that they flow into each other rather nicely. Initially, this video was supposed to be only about theism, and then a few pages about Umineko popped up out of nowhere. You know, as they do. Because of the way in which I wrote them, there are premises in both that aid every part. I don't want to divorce them, and even if I did, it's only natural that they are connected anyway. If you are here for the theism part, then you can very well watch the entire video, same for the Umineko crowd. Okay, I'll go straight at the soul of this and won't waste any time. So the way I approach belief, which is different from dogma, is by viewing it as two separate facets that form a whole. Like the yin and yang concept. Facet number 1 is characterized by the metaphysical aspect. This one consists of propositions pertaining to the subject of God's existence as a non-conceptual being. So stuff like, quotation marks, does God exist? And similar things, some of which we are all too familiar with. I think everyone knows this is the part that most people's feathers get ruffled over, even though talking about this facet in an isolated manner doesn't complete the meaning of belief. Even though I say this is the part that we are going to tackle in this video. Before that though, facet number 2 is characterized by the wonderful and extremely rich conceptual aspect which governs the subjective realm of belief. I will tackle or embrace this one much later. I once thought of these two mainly as separate things, but the more I thought about it, I realized that they presuppose each other in a very beautiful and unorthodox relationship, which can only be perceived with love. You can't divorce them, and this idea goes well with the aforementioned yin-yang analogy. We can talk about them separately and it's important that we do, but it's only when we understand what is being created when they are together that we're able to observe the full picture of belief. But again, without love, it cannot be seen. If you do, however, already have the full picture of belief in front of you, then you already understand that everyone is God in a certain sense. But don't worry though, because this video will stick to rock-hard facts and logic. Yet, there's some love to be had in that too. A specific type of love, and it will be directed at a few individuals that really need it, and no matter what they say, also love it. They love the empiricism pill, so naturally, the agency provides. So let's strap our metaphysical not quite empirical goggles and talk about the reason as to why you clicked on this video. I wrote a check with my mouth, so let's see if it holds water, or if the water holds it. So my position starts with one simple concept, but it is not limited to this concept. This concept is a building block, but it's not the end-all be-all of my argument. It's part of a premise. So remember that very well, because I don't want you to start debunking before I deliver my point. Back to this concept. I'm talking about the double negative. The double negative is basically saying that you can't disprove proposition X because evidence that could disprove proposition X has not been provided. A proposition is a claim or an opinion. So for example, I can't disprove that there's a goblin in one of my drawers right now. At least until I open the said drawer. And I can't guarantee the existence of God, but I can guarantee that there are a number of people boiling right now because I deploy this concept. And not only that, but some of them are also probably rejecting the concept merely by virtue of it being a double negative. This is foolish because this concept is bound in logic, so by denying it you'd have to go against logic itself. I'm not saying it's not doable, but cackle, good luck. Some people call it sophistry, but that's silly to me. I hate it when ideas are branded as sophistry simply because they are not appreciated. There is actual sophistry that can be generated out there, but the term is used a lot as a buzzword that some ideas simply don't deserve. Especially when we are talking about such a simple and honest idea like the double negative. An idea that, in my opinion, is very rarely utilized to its full potential, and when someone does it, the result can feed into a greater scope of ideas, leading to a regalia of meaningful concepts and even ways of thinking. So it needs to be stated now and forever that there is absolutely nothing incoherent about a double negative. There's nothing illogical to be had about it, no contradiction to be found, and it always accomplishes what it's meant to accomplish, which is to generate the smallest possible chance of something being the case. In fact, rejecting a double negative purely by virtue of it being one requires an argument that goes beyond logic. It's sort of like saying that 1 + 1 doesn't equal 2. If you can't disprove the existence of a given thing X, then there is absolutely no premise that would lead to the conclusion of, quotation marks, thing X certainly does not exist. Provided the existence of thing X hasn't been disproven, there will always be a possibility of its existence. Even if that possibility is a zero followed by an infinite amount of other zeros in a line that ends with a 1. This doesn't serve as proof that substantiates the existence of thing X, but it does serve as a way of keeping it afloat in a limbo-type state. So far so good, but this is not all. Right about now, atheists would say that I'm deploying a strawman of their position, claiming that no true atheist would deny that possibility, it's just that they don't find meaning within it. That's because atheism, in its purest form, is not a denial of God. It is a lack of belief in God, which implies a clinging to a preponderance of evidence that points in the direction of God most likely not existing. Although maybe even that is a bit off, and a clearer definition would be not having a position on God's existence. But what if I told you that said preponderance of evidence is irrelevant to this question? Because the question of God isn't as clear-cut as a criminal case or a chess match, but it's more like a cat box, Schrodinger's cat box. And just like in any cat box, there's a dichotomy of possibilities that lie in perfect equilibrium. There is a 50-50 chance of either possibility to be true. A superposition. But what things are there that skew the possibility of God existing in the cat box to 50%? Wasn't it 0.1% before? So let's tackle that next. Here is the moment where atheists will probably predict me trying to come up with empirical evidence that counterbalances it and brings it to 50%, making it a cat box. But they are wrong. Because 1. I don't believe there's empirical data to prove that God exists. And 2. What fills up the 50% is not my empiricism, but the nature of God and his cat box. However, before I make you fully visualize it, I want to make one thing clear. Atheists suffer from a severe non sequitur virus. And by non sequitur, I mean that they think doing one thing accomplishes another. They think that eliminating pockets of scientific ignorance, as Neil cheekily puts it, that also has the effect of eliminating the chances of God existing. But you have to understand one thing. No matter how many pockets of scientific ignorance you clear, that is not the same thing as creating a preponderance of evidence in the direction of God not existing. By clearing pockets of ignorance, you simply clear pockets of ignorance. You open up billions and billions of pockets regarding physics, evolution, does antimatter fall normally in these conditions, etc., but that does not equate with opening the cat box of God. Because everything has its own cat box, so by attempting to open cat box A, you cannot open cat box B. I'm somewhat ignorant when it comes to formal notation, but if I'd have to use an analogy of the same vein it would look like this. By finding value x in an equation you don't find the value y in another equation. A good analogy would be that no matter how much you search for sharks in the tundra, you will most likely never find one in there. But that's more likely to happen than finding God's cat box. And you must do that, provided you want the answer to your question. But what does it mean to open up the God cat box? Where does it lay? How do you unfasten its jaws? Well, I hate to be that guy. Not at all. Essentially, we don't know. But I can see that skeptical glint in your eyes, you are not convinced that it's a cat box. So the card that I will turn next will convince you of exactly that. But before I turn the card in one visceral motion that'll make certain people fall to their knees with a bloodshot cute defeated expression on their tear-dampened faces, basically an ahegao, let's take a look at the Versus Battle Wiki's tiering system. To put it shortly, this is a system that was designed for the purpose of ranking fictional characters or even real-life beings by power or potency of accomplishing things. As you can see, we have infinitesimal, human level, street level. 5C, that's moon level, so Rashi. Star level, that one's fun. We also have the tier high 1A. And at the very end of this list, we have tier 0. Tier 0 is basically what you'd expect God to be. So much so that simply being omnipotent would not suffice to qualify for this tier, as this tier refers to the greatest level of power that can ever exist. Honestly, God doesn't even need to be tier 0, he can even be 1B lower. And this is the moment the card turns. If God is this omnipotent being that supersedes all other beings, then how are you going to open his box? It's impossible. You can't open the box of a being on this level. Even if you uncover every secret of the natural and supernatural world in the entire omniverse, you cannot ever even touch this cat box. And because you cannot ever reach it, and because nothing can answer in place of it, the possibilities lie in perfect 50-50 equilibrium. A perfect cat box. How are you supposed to find that, let alone open it? Do you think you can just show up to Azimuth and be like wakey wakey?
Wakey.
That's not happening. That's like Mario trying to trace a 3D motion in one of his 2D games. He might be able to do it in universe, but not relative to the player, maybe. So if you've been skeptical towards the idea that this question is a cat box by virtue of it not having a random factor, as a cat box would have, then that thought has perished by now, because this isn't just a cat box, but it might just be the most perfect cat box ever. Which is fitting for someone called God. Such a being that supersedes everyone else must have a fitting cat box, one that if the owner keeps it isolated, you cannot really gauge the answer unless the owner allows you to. And there's nothing from outside that can influence the answer. So it is a cat box. The answer lies in the cat, and the box walls are the discrepancy between God and everyone else. The random factor is unaffected. Now, in order for that to be true, it is true that you have to assume some things. One of these things would be that God wants to hide. That isn't necessarily presupposed, but it can be. The other thing would be that God is almighty, omnipotent, or of a sufficiently high tier, like tier 0, 1A, 1B, or something high enough. Because if he is of a sufficiently low tier, the chances to gauge the answer become more and more numerous. Now, of course, you can't make God too weak, or else it doesn't make sense as to why he's God. Anyway, you don't even have to assume these things, they assume themselves by virtue of the fact that we are talking about such a being. His lack of outside of cat box hints can be also attributed to other stuff. The point is, they do not pose problems to our reasoning. So let's recap. 1. There is no proof that God doesn't exist. In the same breath, there is no proof that God exists. So the state of God's existence is ambiguous. If a debater would seek to reject this first premise, they would have to make an argument that renders the concept of a double negative invalid or just unusable. Good luck with that. 2. The answer of God's existence is locked behind the walls of a cat box. Any way by which anyone else other than God or a higher being than God might get closer to the answer is locked behind the jaws that separate God from anyone else. Those jaws were forged in the crucibles of godhood, and they represent the gap in power and drip between us and God. Naturally, lower beings can't get past these jaws, and so it naturally follows that they can't also narrow the gap between themselves and the answer. Even if that narrowing is the smallest that it can be. That transforms the question of God from a mere back and forth, using the childish Hitchens razor to an impenetrable cat box. So it's not even like a coin flip, because that's bound by physics. We're talking about true randomness here. Another great analogy is the Braun tube one. So you know how these old TVs have Braun tubes? Think of the perceivable reality as a TV screen, and what's behind the creation of that reality as the contents of a Braun tube. We know what's behind a normal Braun tube, but do you know what's behind a Braun tube behind reality? Or at least, the possible answer pertaining to a higher being. It's not an answer that can be gauged just by looking at the screen, you have to look inside the Braun tube. But what if we cannot reach that Braun tube in our reality? We can replace the Braun tube with the backlight or liquid crystals for a more modern version. This is another analogy picked right from Umineko. Seriously, read Umineko. If a debater would want to reject this second point, they'd have to show that the question of God is not a cat box. Ambiguous questions become superpositions when the answer is unattainable. And what is more unattainable than truth pertaining to someone who is of tier 0? So that's it, boys. That's the most desired, most wanted answer to one of the most asked question ever. We don't know, that's the first part. But it's more than just that. We don't know, but the two answers exist in perfect equilibrium. It really is an unbothered superposition. So place your bets. Another thing I'd like to say, and this is pretty important. At first glance, this video seems like an attack towards atheists that seeks to invalidate their views. And while my views are divergent from theirs, I'm not invalidating their views in the way you're probably thinking. That's not the point of this video. In fact, this video contains critiques towards both sides. It tackles both the linear relationships some atheists think we have with the truth, and the powerful sense of adherence towards inherent rules of divinity possessed by theists. And I don't give lip service to mellow the mood when I have a controversial claim active, so I mean it when I say it. Even if God were to show himself before you right now and show you some impossible magic trick, that still wouldn't be proof that God exists. It could be just a high 1B entity pulling a prank on your gullible. You could be on DMT or something else could be the case. Likewise, if you scan the entire omniverse with the most cutting-edge technology, that still doesn't count as proof of the contrary position. Skepticism goes both ways, as I like to say. To really gauge the actual answer, you'd have to find some omnipotent or tier 0 level confirmation. And that is not the case only for the cat box of God, but also for the infinite multiplicity of cat boxes behind every proposition in the omniverse. And yeah, such cat boxes exist for every other proposition simply by virtue that they could be reinforced by tier 0 walls. Same reasoning we just went through. So, is a level of confirmation that could not only open the cat box of God, but also the universal cat box pertaining to every possible and impossible question, even possible? This is in itself a cat box. And if something so fundamental as the answer to this question is behind a cat box, then why would anything else be set in stone? At this point, every single subjective interpretation of truth with respect to any proposition is the actual truth. Because there will always be a superposition knitted in the answer of any given proposition. According to this idea, everyone is right in regards to everything, and the only thing they'd have to do in order to achieve ultimate truth is asserting that their statement is the ultimate truth. If that statement is not superseded by a tier 0 rebuttal, then the statement continues to exist as truth. Even if we have two contradictory answers, they coexist as truth because that's what a superposition is. So for all of you who think contradictions are the end-all be-all of philosophy, you're goofy. Not only can the cat be both alive and dead at the same time in regards to superposition, but also in actuality. And there can be more than two answers when stated that there are only two. And there can be more cats. The cats can also have tentacles and gaping lamprey-like mouths. Because the answer can be unlocked only by a key with a 0 engraved on it, the most impossible of impossibility can be achieved in such a cat box. Square circles, contradictions. The most grotesque eldritch aberration that overrules any rule can be conceived that way. And even after that tier 0 confirmation has been given, one cat box could become a matryoshka, spiraling into infinity in a mindfuckery that I'm not even going to get into, always seeking another tier 0 plus confirmation. But let's not cheapen the tier 0, after all, we'll probably never have to deal with it. At least for the time being, since the end-all be-all of truth appears to be subjectivity. Truth clings solely to our subjectiveness in the absence of a higher confirmation. So all it takes is to be a subject in order to arrive at the truth. I think, therefore I am. I think, therefore everything else is. And that makes me sigh in relief because I don't really want to allow that eldritch abomination to exist. So if our subjective reality is the ultimate reality, then just like everything else subjective, the answers we arrive at are guided by meaning we associate ourselves with. Just like in a superposition, there is no wrong or correct meaning, there is just meaning. And because there are multiple subjects, two completely unique truths can exist based on unique meanings, giving meaning to a superposition. Though for the subject only one truth exists at a given time, one superposition only truly has meaning because it is being gauged by two different subjects. So would it even be a superposition without subjects? Maybe what keeps reality together or everything from being the case is the fact that subjects are contrary to each other. We might find out one day. So when you understand this, you'll realize that meaning isn't some nice little fetish to fetishize when times are hard, but it is the apparatus behind the most fundamental truth, and that truth is none other than the subjective reality. Some people would say that I'm misunderstanding Schrodinger's cat box, and they would release some pragmatic stuff in my direction about how it's meant to be a reductio ad absurdum, it's meant to gauge some truth about the wave function, or even that Schrodinger himself didn't believe in it, and stuff like that. But I understand it perfectly, I have to. Schrodinger's cat box is meant to show that the subject is the ultimate prime mover of truth. The box is a red herring. It makes you think that by opening it, you will receive a certain truth, that by following that truth, you will find it in its entirety. And at the same time, you can simply gauge that truth just by being aware of its existence. In this way, the box is both unattainable and very easy to open at the same time. So, I shouldn't say that it's unattainable. Because even if you find that perfect, tier 0, presumably unattainable outer truth, nothing will make it the perfect truth other than the fact that you now believe in it. And then you will realize that the truth was always there. It was always with you. You'll realize that you are incorruptible, and you will maintain your form no matter what. So if you find that truth, no matter what it is, there is no reason to fear the endless damnation of dogma or the dark nothingness of oblivion. You might see the chasm, but you never fall in it. And yes, you can choose to see the infinite multiplicity of cat boxes as clusters of unfalsifiable, unverifiable propositions, and be reserved in your betting. But if one would want to dig up a certain truth from this endless chasm, they could. If someone would shyly swing their pickaxe and mine some gold ores, they could turn them into gold bars. They are not wrong. Some others would say this cat box thing renders truth meaningless. But, in my opinion, the truth remains perfectly meaningful because it has meaning as the engine that moves it forward. And this whole cat box business doesn't mean that you have to accept every truth. That's the point of this whole idea. It's up to you what you consider as truth and what criteria you use to arrive there. You can put your chips on one single zone or state where the ball will fall. I know that I don't accept every truth. In fact, there are truths I despise. Depending on what your truth is, I might agree or disagree with it. I might love or absolutely abhor it. I'm just here to assert that truth, philosophy, and reality, everything, is very open-ended as opposed to narrow and linear. So don't let anyone cheekily assert their truth over yours. Now, if you think you're wrong with respect to your own criteria, then admit so at the right time. This cat box business doesn't have to be solipsistic. So when you realize that, then you'll stop looking for omnipotent confirmations, and you'll understand that you are the fundamental basic, whatever there is. According to this idea, the lack of belief is also meaningful. Any position is meaningful, and I guess the closest thing to nihilism would be not betting your chips at all on any zone, or something of the sort. Other groups of people would say that this produces awful scenarios like justifying immoral behavior. But again, that's not true if you find meaning in the opposite. See how that works? You can choose to keep at bay meaning that does not go well with yours, but your meaning, your truth does not supersede another subject's truth in their own reality, only in yours, which basically means that said truth is superseded. That's why you shouldn't demonize or dehumanize people when they try to screw you. You just deal with them accordingly. Also, I have no problem sticking to empirical evidence when the discourse presupposes empirical evidence. Like if I was debating whether the earth is flat, I wouldn't just deploy, quotation marks, my cat box plus, my truth and end the debate. The cat box always exists, but I want to talk relative to a certain tier of truth. It is true that oranges are orange, and we can just end it at that with respect to this particular tier of truth, but even in this clear-cut case, there is a cat box possibility of oranges not being orange, and someone creating the illusion that they are. And that could be locked behind tier 0 walls. You never know with these oranges. So if someone's meaning would point to a different answer, and they would perceive said answer to be the truth of any kind, then that would simply be the truth because the subject only needs themselves as validation in that regard. Another subject claiming something different doesn't challenge the claim of truth from the paradigm of the first subject, which is the only relevant paradigm for the first subject. Which, if you are the first subject, is the only relevant paradigm. Period. Their truth is no different than truth dictated by a fundamental thing like a tier 0 cat box, because at the very tippity top of each proposition they affirm, there is a cat box, only they can decide what to do with, what can be done with it. Unless there is a tier 0 confirmation superseding their claim of truth, but even then, until it happens, it's all just a freaking cat box. Ooh. This actually sounds like meta-existentialism. Hehe. Give it whatever buzzword you want, I just call it truth. Look, I'm not telling you to lose yourself in the vast sea of possibilities. I'm not encouraging you to not be a realistic mofo. And just like Gandalf said, quote, something dreaming all the time isn't good. All I'm saying is that if you ever need to create truth in order to bring yourself solace, you can do that. I'm giving you this physical conceptual sword that you can use whenever you want. Actually, I'm not giving you anything. The truth was always there. I'm just pointing in the direction of that potentiality. I'm actually not that great of a person. I did some things I'm disgusted by. Becoming a better person won't erase them, but it must be the only way of telling them I'm sorry. So this is also a way for me to never again forget the truth. Been a little vague there. I feel like I had to say this. I'm just a person. So to sum it up, this whole talk about cat boxes is what I consider to be the point where the metaphysical aspect of belief fuses together with the conceptual one in a fusion Shinka-type beat. And let me tell you dudes and dudettes, I did not think I'd start talking about this in the exact same video. This segment was supposed to be a closing statement, but the words just spouted out with 150 bass power in the rain. I guess I'm just very excited to make this video. That's for sure. And I actually learned a whole lot about my position while writing this. I have lots of thoughts I want to share, and writing them like this really helps me refine them. I just hope that this time I will actually turn this into a video and not let it sit in the folder. It's not like I'm saying something new. Just putting together concepts that were already there. I'm inspired by philosophy and some fiction like Umineko, but I'm not well read on philosophy, so I have a lot to learn. Now back to business. It's true that what I explained is an aspect of complete belief according to my view, but that doesn't mean it ends there. That's why it's an aspect. There has to also be love, and there is a lot to be said about belief, about each individual aspect and the sums of their parts. I'll give you the short version for now, though. Let's say something bothers you. You're anxious, depressed about something or another thing could be happening, and you feel the associated hopelessness that goes along with this kind of scenario. Now imagine you start feeling a wind coming right out of nowhere. Not a dust devil. Just a little gust, but you don't feel surprised because you created that gust of wind. It's a gust that when employed, it can knock out any negative feeling, any sorrow, and any possible negative outcome that can knock you down. For lack of a better word, this wind allows you to unlock and utilize Tier 0 powers. Now imagine that. You don't just employ this phenomenon as a coping mechanism, but you actually believe in it. No. It's more than just believing in it. You state it exists. You assert its existence. This wind could have any effects you want, and its existence is certain in your eyes. Now I want to ask you. Wouldn't the person for whom all of these things are true know the greatest peace they could possibly feel while bound to their current existence? If you'd ask me, I'd say yes. And of course, while we are living on this side of reality, there are many other things that we seek. Love, meaning, the power to protect our loved ones, fun, etc. So this particular wind is not enough, but no. I shouldn't say that, because the moment you say it's not enough, its omnipotence ends, and so does the effectiveness in using it for achieving a level of strength that cannot be broken by anything in this world, because the power employed is not of this world. Sure, you might not think of this wind as a sufficient replacement for a thing you really value. But losing its strength also makes you lose that edge which can be used to defend the aforementioned thing of value, if you do choose to employ it. So stating that it's sufficient is a must. Stating that it's omnipotent is a necessity. It is sufficient, or else it's nothing at all. What I'm describing right now is fairly complex and extremely subjective. This is but an example. The wind could be replaced with anything else. A sword, a cannon, a beam, a card, a butterfly, an attack from a video game, a nice garden riddled with golden roses, where a gothic mommy is combing your hair, while a suave mofo serves you cookies. And its effects are solely dependent on the user's preferences. It can be omnipotent, or just capable. It can be a knife that when employed, can cut through your anxiety immediately, or it can be some Buddha-type buff that makes you achieve nirvana, or Tier 0. The possibilities are endless. Maybe you even did stuff like this before. It's really akin to screaming like Goku or shouting one for all, Hyaku Pacento when you train really hard, but with some tweaks. That's why Deku versus Muscular makes sense. There is meaning in saying that you can output 1,000,000% when your surroundings tell a different story. I could explain this concept more, but for now, the gist is enough. In comparison to this, believing in God is actually far tamer. But the belief in God also counts as something like what I just exemplified. It's just that you're placing belief in an entity that's already there as opposed to embedding a concept into physical reality. It seems less arrogant, though I'm sure God wouldn't care if you used those weapons. He'd actually be happy for you, probably. To be honest, I think the more arrogant act is to postulate that dogma is so accurate that acting it out is in itself an act of God. In this case, you make too many statements about an outer being that you don't really have the authority to do, and you might even postulate truth in their own paradigm. By saying God hates X or God hates Y all the time, you are essentially doing that. What I'm describing now is a pure dogmatist. I'm not saying the nature of God is not traceable through all sorts of cues, because I do believe that God is reflected in our reality. I'm just not a dogmatist. I think that making too many descriptive statements about the universe by hyperbolizing the weaknesses of empiricism or rejecting any such proposition, merely because of an over-adherence to empiricism are both extremes, and they are stupid. For me, reality is a cat box. This conclusion doesn't allow me to lose myself up in my own ass and make reality proprietary, just my own destiny. That doesn't stop at God either. Here's the way I see it. For me, there is God, the Creator, and there are the constructs that I make. I view God as mysterious. I'm not comfortable making too many descriptive statements about him, and the ones that I do make together with other propositions about God are up in the air. The constructs that I make, however, are not up in the air. Because I created them, and I'm using them as I see fit. And if God created me, then He created me to be capable of using these weapons. My interpretation of this relationship is parent and child. Just like how a parent raises their child to be strong on their own and find meaning, I view that relationship as no different than the one we have with God. And what I find especially beautiful is that even though I don't make dogmatic statements about God, and I own these constructs just like I own my existence, I see God reflected in them and the intent behind them, just like how you'd be able to trace characteristics of a parent by looking at their child. I feel that fighting spirit and the will to use it for good, morals or taste can be traceable this way too, or the reason as to why anything has a form, rather than no form. Giving these things a sense of objectivity even though most of them are subjective. Even the reason for suffering can be traced all the way back to God, because God Himself would want to have an adventure, to play as if He's not God. And adventure presupposes suffering, adversity. Valuing one thing presupposes that you know its counterpart. God isn't evil because He doesn't interfere directly to make the current world better, because the situation that you are in right now is a consequence of the scenario that God would want to live. Referencing Alan the Don Dada Watts again. An imperfect world, there is value to be had there. I think this is perfectly true, assuming God exists, and if it's not true then why would He sprawl into being these universal axioms? One example that I really like is the Übermensch. An Übermensch, to put it shortly, is a strong person, capable of enduring any form of adversity, and lifting himself and others out of the mud. He's strong enough so as to defend what he values, but he does not use that power for evil. He's not corrupted by it. This is a very noble way to live, it doesn't fall into extremes, and it also doesn't contradict nature, because if one were to live by it, not only would he benefit, but everyone else would also benefit in a way that doesn't detract from anything. That is what I call balance. And this is what seals the deal for me. If that sort of balance is made possible by the scales of the universe, then how can I believe God is eldritch or evil? I don't buy that one bit. The fact that matters are not perfect in this universe doesn't lead to that conclusion of God being evil, because that irregularity is the very point of the universe. It gives it meaning in the current paradigm. But let's talk more about these constructs, these weapons now. They are similar to what some psychologists recommend, which is to write stuff like, quote, "I'm enough." But this has a metaphysical amp, and so it's a bit stronger. I'm not saying it can't remain strictly conceptual for it to be effective, I just think it's more powerful with the amp. Of course, techniques like writing "I am enough" are also contingent on realizing that what matters in life is definitely not stupid shit like other people's validation. Though this differs from person to person, the things that matter in life go as such. The state of your being, which encapsulates stuff like health, freedom, mental health, the ones you love, and morals. At least a basic adherence to the non-aggression principle is required. When you realize how unimportant the usual crap you worry about is, your life is going to be way easier. You are going to be way less self-deprecating too. And I know it looked as if I was self-deprecating earlier, but I'm a pretty confident person. The only time when I'm self-deprecating is when I actually do something immoral, not when someone gets salty over me. And that's as justified as it can be. I wouldn't have it any other way. I don't want to make a weapon that will justify me being a piece of shit. I love the fact that I got to talk about this, but it's a tangent of topic, so let's go back to those conceptual physical weapons. I want to address some critiques some people would address towards me. Some would say that these weapons transform people into unrealistic motherfuckers, and unrealistic motherfuckers who base decisions on inaccurate models of reality are bound to receive bad outcomes. But not knowing reality is not a prerequisite of using these weapons. I fully recommend getting to know the immediate reality, as you do recommend. I agree that having an accurate model of reality with respect to our closest tier of truth is important. These weapons are something else entirely, something greater. They ought to be deployed purely according to the subject's desires, values, and decisions. So if the subject values and desires good outcomes in the paradigm of their current state, then they might want to make appropriate decisions with respect to the tier of truth that their existence is bound to, and not let these weapons interfere, but allow them to enhance their efforts. They can use these weapons to give them an edge. And if they want to go full tier 0 while still being in tune with this reality to certain degrees, that works too. One does not subtract from the other. There is a lot of nuance to be had in what I'm saying and the full scope of this idea. It's not reducible to escapism, it also doesn't let people fall into excess pragmatism. It's about putting the two pieces together. It's about balance. Balance is unattractive and the hardest thing to attain, but I realized how important it is. People gravitate towards extremes, they look for scapegoats, boogeymen, then they fall back to whatever extreme they came from. Balance doesn't have to look balanced either, it simply means picking up from the palette of each piece in order to achieve something that you value, or maybe even something greater, something that is good for others, which a lot of the time requires another pair of eyes, a new perspective. Balance is very hard to attain, but sometimes it's even harder to figure out. It's also extremely easy, but that's something for each individual subject to decide. Anyway, of course there will be crowds that will spurg ma escapism, ma lying to yourself and ma unrealism. And I can see how my statements can be also taken as a political message. Ma leftism wanting to eliminate all differences between things. And for the people who'd say these things, that is your truth, but it is not the truth. I can state that not only as a catbox enthusiast extraordinaire, turning the catbox card itself on you, but also because what I'm saying is at its core, one of the most fundamental ships that help us rove through life. What I'm saying now is nothing new or progressive, it's something that has been around forever. Maybe it doesn't help you, and I'm not saying it has to, but it did. Once. It did help all the things that led to you. It's the same thing with philosophy. A lot of people nowadays regard philosophy to be useless, and at the same time, plenty are returning to it. And it makes sense as to why they do, because where would they rather go? To the substanceless posturing-filled world filled with ungratefulness, airheadedness, virtue signaling, hedonism, hypocritical garbage, and other shit like this, we see everywhere nowadays. I just described substanceless commentary channels and similar trash. Even channels that are genuinely funny are better than that garbage, because I regard good humor to be on par with philosophy, or at least its effects are. And philosophy is a compass, it guides you. Just because you can't eat it, it doesn't gratify you instantly, or it doesn't fly you to Mars to make rainbow onion farms and immortality fetal juice. That doesn't mean it's useless. And I don't have to point out the consequences of being devoid of it, you see it everywhere. And sure, you can present all the consequentialist arguments that showcase the many ways in which belief in philosophy created chaos. But so is true of many other things, yet we don't think of that chaos as the default. Like technology. It's not the thing itself, but what you decide to do with it. This is especially true when it comes to a free interpretation like the universal cat box. You can laugh at Jordan Peterson for saying I don't know if he exists, yet I act as if he does, but so do you when you look so fondly at that fictional character and port their behavior into your own personality, be it that it may ever so slightly and involuntary. And yes, it is fiction. Just like the Bible, right? But so is insert your favorite fictional piece in here, and yet it still made you cry. Just because you don't find value in it, that doesn't mean there is none to be had. Without love, it cannot be seen. So don't be arrogant enough to think you can destroy a truth you can't even see. And sure, you can turn the catbox card on me too, because you are also capable of using that truth. You can even surpass the double negative with that card. You can even defeat the universal catbox with it. And what I'm about to say is not set in stone precisely because of that card, but why do I feel like your answer is disingenuous, just as disingenuous as saying I don't exist? It sounds the same to me, especially now since you are using the catbox card yourself. And if you are not, your truth just seems flimsy in front of one who does, at least when we are talking about these issues. Knocking the universal catbox after you've been made aware of its existence is just as stupid and disingenuous. I guess this is paralleled nicely by the fact that no matter how many people call belief stupid in the current culture, it doesn't change the fact that the strongest people all across history did believe. But it's not simply about believing. They were the strongest, hardest because their belief was powerful, and because its pointers pinpointed towards traits that made them more powerful, not weaker. It's true that there are bad, regressive tenets in religions all across the world, but they are not inherently true of religion, a belief. You can use a knife in many different ways, with a plethora of disparate intents. And you realize this when you realize where belief actually comes from. That's why I respect people like Alicia Long, they just get it. He might not agree with this free idea of belief, I don't know, I haven't asked him, but he gets the concept really well. And I was the same. Like many other people around me, I was that edgy kid who would use Hitchens' razor on 92-year-old grannies without even talking to them. But as I grew older I realized that I was such a fucking hypocrite. Everything I loved in life was set on the same foundation as their belief, and yet I was making fun of them because what they chose to direct that belief towards was different than mine. It all comes from the self, everything, including all forms of belief. We are inspired by amazing characters like Guts, Geralt, Gon, and Kaiji. We look in awe at how they endure and fight against adversity, and for good reason, but the exact same apparatus standing behind that feeling also powers up someone who believes in Jesus and is moved by his suffering. That's what Jordan Peterson was talking about this entire time. That's what he means by saying stuff like you can't be atheistic if you appreciate art, or belief is survival. Some dipshits will look at it from the paradigm of buzzwords and fail to get the soul. Yoo-hoo, why would you call it belief and not survivability? This is why, dipshit. Debate me. I'm talking about a certain someone but. Ugh, it doesn't matter. This also applies to religious people. Don't just persecute someone because they seem degenerate to you, there has to be some deeper reasoning there. Also, dogmatists can be way scarier than non-believers, so this valuing of freedom applies to religious people too, obviously. It applies to everyone. And this whole belief, meta-business is also the science behind WIFUS. Yes, I've cracked the code. So, muster your love, your meaning, be it extra-dimensional or not. Let that fire burn inside of you, that thumos. And smelt those ores into gold bars. If someone doesn't try to knock your or other people's ores down, don't knock theirs. Whether in action or philosophy. Regardless of what they choose to mine. Indifferent of whether they are atheistic or believe. It's very simple. As is life. Whoa, this whole ore and pickaxe and mining analogy is way more bubbly than it was intended to be. But I'm not complaining. And hey, mining is not bubbly at all, but in this context, it did sound pretty wholesome, hyper, and cute. Okay. This is all fine and dandy, but there is one thing that is definitely wrong. Even if this cat box stuff is being granted, there is nothing you can say that would make any of these propositions true if evidence hasn't been provided for them. Even if they are ambiguous or even superposed, that will never make your hand-picked propositions true. Truth exists only in the presence of proof, it's your own words. And yet they are. They are true. Truth can be generated that way. Oof, it's hard to argue for the witch's side. Now I know your pain. Actually, it's not hard at all. Believe it or not, this video is not meant to be a super woke self-help video, or I should say that is not its main purpose. It can be taken like that, and it also tackles some topics worth thinking about, albeit briefly. I believe everything I laid out, including what I'm about to powder over, which is what I take to be the main star of this video. And that is Umineko. So aside from some good old talk about theism, this video is also meant to explain what the gold truth is and subsequently explain magic in the Golden Land, in Umineko. I mentioned Umineko a few times during this video, so for those who don't know, Umineko is a sound novel, yet you can also say it's a visual novel, if you refer to the PS3 version which enhanced the visuals. Although lately, I found myself loving the old sprites thanks to a certain duo. It's also thanks to this duo that I started rereading Umineko, and before I knew it, my grey little cogwheels started moving in a way only Umineko can make them move. I love you guys. They know who they are. Umineko is great, it's amazing, it's a masterpiece. To say that I recommend it is an understatement. But let's get into how this is related to this gold truth I name-dropped earlier. I don't recommend researching about it if you haven't read the series, so this segment is more or less for those who have. The red truth is used to spell out truths we can assert truth values based on something. Basically, truth we normally use. For example, dogs are not cats. You can earn the red truth by basing your statements on evidence, empirical or not, if you are a detective or something like that. However, if you are a witch, you can just use the red truth, and it's uncontested. The red truth is not necessarily used only to spell out truths present in the paradigm of objectivity, because it can also be used to refer to subjective or conceptual propositions. You wouldn't be able to say a leprechaun is inside my drawer in red, but you would be able to say that leprechauns exist as fictional entities. What I love about this is how well the theme of fiction is embedded within it. It makes sense as to why you would trust the red, even letting aside the fact that it's a well-defined rule. Saying that it's a rule and therefore it is valid would normally beg the question and fail as confirmation. But because the red is used by game masters to refer to a work that they created, or by people who earn it, then, of course, you can trust the red. It also means that the red truth is unreliable in making objective claims, simply because the red can be used on subjective things like that. So I have bad news for Rositras enthusiasts. As if there weren't enough arguments against Rositras already. Now, the gold truth is also truth, and it relies basically on everything I talked about in my so-called closing segment. That's my interpretation of it. It is truth the subject takes as truth. The principles I laid out in that segment are also the base for magic in general. Magic does not need to be omnipotent all the time, it can just be capable. Sometimes you just want to make candies rain from the sky, or kill your classmates. Maybe these things do not suffice all the time, and you arrive at a point where perfect solace is needed. This has been expressed through two phenomena during the story: the Golden Land and the Gold Truth. The Golden Land is the ultimate expression of perfection, and yet, it has been described by Shannon as a place where the individual is 100% content, yet not happy or complete. The reason is that an individual will still be bound to their objective existence, just like I mentioned earlier. You can use something like those weapons, the gold truth or the golden land, but you are still not omnipotent, and so you will experience the lack of that thing you crave, that thing which is knitted in the fabric of reality, of which you are a mere decoration of. That's why Maria graduated from the golden land only when Sakura returned to her, or why a certain someone feels empty in the golden land without the recognition of a certain someone. In the case of that first certain someone, this land is nothing more than magic, so it becomes stronger when more people believe in it. Or when the right person believes. But that's in itself the weakness of magic. It has been made clear in the story that magic is a way to enrich your life with concepts, with meaning, whether you give these things a metaphysical amp or not. Therefore magic is not perfect, it's not meant to be. It's meant to be fun, enhancing, enriching. But you can arrive at points where these things do not suffice anymore, and so, the Golden Land was made to surpass that weakness, hence the Golden Land is perfect. It is only when the user doubts its powers that it becomes weaker. But that's the grave error Beatrice made. She applied the rules of normal magic to absolute magic, which is inherently not bound by rules, and doesn't require other people's validation aside from its user. But even so, there are reasons why this perfect land can be not so perfect at times, reasons we'll get into. Now, I use the Golden Land and the Gold Truth interchangeably because they are the absolute endpoint of magic power, therefore they are indistinguishable. So the same things apply for the Gold Truth too. Just like a writer can state things in red about their works, a Gold Truth user is doing the same thing. If magic comes from meaning which can be enhanced by fiction, among other things, then by stating things in gold, the subject doesn't just allow themselves to be enhanced by fiction, their whole life becomes fiction with them as the author. This is essentially a shot at becoming omnipotent in their own universe by treating it as fiction and writing destiny itself off, just like plot threads in a novel. And I really love how Ryu carried the theme of fiction and applied it even in this metaphysical hacks. Everything parallels so beautifully as per the genius of Ryu. And it's not a surprise that it does. Fiction is instrumental in the mechanics of magic, belief, and many other things. It's no wonder RYU07 made it one of the main themes of his story. I myself see fiction as one of the fundamental aspects of the human mind. Fiction is so much more than stuff that doesn't happen or a Netflix show you play in the background when you are bored. In fact, fiction is pretty much real. Even if you gently put the metaphysical stuff aside, fiction is real in the conceptual realm, and the effects it has are very real and very tangible. It is immaterial, but that's irrelevant because meaning itself is immaterial, and it's also the stuff that propels us forward. I actually see fiction as a natural extension of the mind. Kind of like how an ocean is the natural extension of a river in a situation where this is true. Fiction is not only useful, it's instrumental. Fiction is thought. Actually, when I think about this, I realize fiction doesn't even need a metaphysical amp of infinite cat boxes to be effective or real. This is also made apparent by the fact that a writer automatically becomes of tier 0 with respect to their work, without any supplementary meta-amp. Fiction is more than mistakes or arbitrary golden standards. So drill that into your head, snob. I could write more about fiction, but I think I got the point across pretty well. Now what I want to talk about is something that really impressed me both thematically and metaphysically. And that is boredom. So I've been pretty captivated by the idea of godhood lately, and I've been thinking about all sorts of things that would follow after one becomes a god or the nature of a god that has been God forever. One of the most captivating ideas to me is boredom. You know what this means? When a god is almighty, he or she, or they, get pretty fucking bored. They want to experience vulnerability, adversity, challenge, aka not being a god. I guess this is why tier 0s go to bed and dream a lot. Or are they tier 0 because they dream? Anyway, we've heard of it before. If you ask me, I'm currently 50-50 on this idea. I can see how a being that has reached omnipotence, tier 0 or close, can be susceptible to boredom or hollowness, because no matter how good something is, after an eternity of that thing, everyone would want to play as if they don't have that thing. And what would be achieved by not having it could not be achieved by having it. Logic 100. So omnipotence would not be the answer because the solution is less omnipotence. Logic 200. But I can also see how it would be possible for someone of tier 0 to just alter their brain states to the point where they enjoy being God again. I can see good points in both answers. Actually, this is true of us too. We get bored so fucking fast, and we're almost always poked by the needle of megalomania. Let's do more do more of this and that and more of more. We chase so many different personas and we forget to be us, to exist as us, to be in the present moment. That's the thing though, one of the main themes of Umineko is asking when does magic cease to be enough? But didn't we pivot into a non-magic scenario? Exactly. That's another theme to be had. Where does reality end only for magic to begin and vice versa? This question is not irrelevant, but let's remind ourselves that we are talking about boredom relative to an omnipotent being. And this question feeds into what fascinates me about this idea, this universal boredom, this emptiness. It's the way Ayakishi paralleled the emptiness felt by an omnipotent being with the feeling of emptiness in the context of entering the Golden Land, the one described by Shannon. They are two completely different contexts when examined objectively, but they are both the result of achieving tier 0. So they are completely the same. Boredom in total bliss and emptiness in eternal bliss, the way both results occur in both types of bliss, blurs the line between their differences, because the lack boils down to a subjective need. The metaphysically omnipotent person lacks not being omnipotent because they value what would be attained were they not, and the conceptually omnipotent being lacks being omnipotent, again, because they value the result that follows from achieving said state. When you realize this, you'll see how they don't just blend thematically, but also in actuality, becoming the exact same thing. Which is quite the point of the Golden Land, and reinforces the idea of subjectivity being the door to omnipotence. You don't know if magic exists or not, but the results of both possibilities are indistinguishable. So who can really be the arbiter of magic? I guess this is why you can't state that magic exists in red. The red becomes meaningless at that point because it would just seek to be that tier 0 confirmation, and we already know where that confirmation really is. This is one of the pillars of Umineko. It's heart. But this is where it gets more interesting. If we assume that the emptiness is a result of something that is lacking, then a truly almighty being would not feel emptiness or boredom. And that is the creator in Umineko, or beings who reach the same level as the creator. And it makes sense. Because all the people tormented by boredom in the entirety of Umineko are not at the level of creator. Entities like Aurora, Lambda, and Burn are not tier 0, but they merely approach it, which is not even scratching its surface, in my opinion. It is said that witches don't really want to reach the creator's realm because they'll lose their will, and while complete detachment might be one way to reach it, and it's not even inherently bad, there is another way. And that way can be as simple as being content with what you have. Essentially tapping into what we already discussed earlier, which is what I take to be tier 0. And there is someone who did that. Someone who, even though they got bored as anyone else would, or they suffered immensely, they alleviated it by sheer curiosity, by the innocent want to have fun, and by their ability to find something good in every circumstance. The person I'm talking about is Maria. I love Maria. Very much so, and I could write about her a lot. Fact was clear-cut ever since I experienced this masterpiece of Umineko for the first time. She is, perhaps, my favorite character in Umineko and 100% the character that I relate to the most in this visual novel. Her story hits your spirit like a wrench, and like the most undying, overpowering hope there can be, at the same time. Seeing her story play out is seeing some of the most fundamental aspects of my life getting beatified through a little lolly. Of course, it goes without saying that she herself is just as great as these aspects and themes. She is the only one I would unironically use the honorific my lady for, and just to be perfectly clear, I just want to protect her smile. That is my only intention in the time span of the 4th, 5th and 6th of October, 1986. Now, when it comes to a hypothetical 1998, there are some other things that could be said, which I'm not going to say right now. Also, I love her relationship with Ange, and seriously now, shout out to Ange. Every story needs a character like her. Someone who overcomes any form of adversity and carries on the legacy of their now deceased loved ones, offering them a sense of closure that only they can give. She is, for all intents and purposes, the light of Umineko. Someone whose indomitable will and sheer guts cannot be swayed by anything, overcoming all. Initially, that was Battler, but even he had to pass the torch. You tell me how that turned out. As far as I'm concerned, it turned out in a lot of hot tears. Hopeful rather than sad, sweeter rather than bitter. But it was 100% earned because the path Ange needed to take in order to bring that closure was not easy. And she did it anyway. Honestly, bringing that sort of hopeful sentiment in a tragic story such as Umineko, materializing it, is not easy. It's really not, especially when you have in view the fact that getting drenched, soaked, and dipped in pain are one of the most common things that characters often do to themselves. Indulging in that suffering. But hey, what's hard for this man? Ryu. I'm not saying that there are little to no displays of hope among the bulk of characters that would make them few-dimensional, and we already know it's not the case. Honestly, I'd love to take longer in my love letters to each character, but this video is not meant to address that extensively, so let's return to Maria. Because of her nature, Maria is essentially the strongest character in Umineko and the best magic user. Stronger than all of the Voyager witches and definitely stronger than Aurora. While Aurora was shown to have weaknesses, Maria has no weakness. It's true that she didn't bring Sakura to the Golden Land that time, but that's not because she couldn't do it, but because she didn't take it to be possible, or didn't feel like it was right. And that barrier exists purely within the scope of her perception, like every other one she has shown. Aside from these limitations present at her fingertips, she can do pretty much anything. Like being the only one who can create a one from the Sea of Zero and be called the Witch of Origins, a title suitable for a creator. She doesn't need another person to create a universe inside which she can have a meaningful existence. As far as I'm concerned, that makes her tier 0 because that's the whole essence of the tier. So whoever made that edit is pretty based. Maria is undoubtedly tier 0. And whether it's her innocence, her truth, or the power of autism pulling the strings behind this perfect power, there is no denying that she has it. Also, Asperger's wafers are the best wafers, but only after 1998. I repeat, only after 1998 in a scenario in which she survived the Rokkenjima massacre. I don't want to hear any bullshit. The only version of Maria that gets wafed is 1998 Maria. Were she alive at that time? Sleep peacefully, Witch of Origins. Maria Ishiramiya. Wait. What is this? Could this be the OmniCat box? The absolute tier 0 confirmation? Let's see what's inside.
Well,
Okay.
I am old King Doran, and thou hast proven thy strength.
Thank you.
Step forth, keep the king's sword in thy hand.
Oh. Oh, wow.